Hello and welcome to another video review from AV Forums. I'm Phil Hinton, I'm the editor, and I have been since 2003. I'm also a fully trained and qualified THX and ISF calibrator with 16 years of experience. In today's video we're looking at the new entry-level OLED TV from Sony for 2019, the AG8. The review unit is a retail sample supplied by Crampton and Moore. They have kindly loaned us a brand new sealed TV from their retail stock so we can bring you an honest and in-depth appraisal of the model. Just like manufacturer supplied units, Crampton and Moore have no input when it comes to the review and no influence on the results. They loan us the TV to support our unbiased reviews. If you want to help support us and are looking at buying a new TV, all we ask is that you may consider Crampton and Moore for your purchase. Their staff are happy to assist you with whatever products you might be interested in. Call Richard on 01302 365 760 or email richard.jones@cramptonandmoore.co.uk. So let's jump straight into the review of the Sony AG8 and look at the design first. As with all OLED TVs, the actual panel is incredibly thin, with a tiny 5mm metal bezel that surrounds the panel's edge. At the bottom this gets slightly larger at 10mm, with a tiny Sony logo on the left hand edge. There's nothing else to be seen on the front of the panel, however the screen surface is very reflective, so make sure you place it away from any direct light sources such as a window. The panel sits on a newly designed stand that differs from what was seen with the AF8. When in one position, it is similar to the older set's design, with the screen sitting a few millimeters above the mounting surface. However, this year you can turn the stand around and this raises the height of the panel so you can fit a soundbar underneath the screen as we have it set up here. You can also route your cables using plastic covers designed to snap onto the stand legs, and this allows you to maintain a clean look to the rear of the set. Around the back of the panel is a large rectangular area that sticks out 20mm from the main panel, and this houses all the electronics connections, processors and audio actuators. Once again, the AG8 has the acoustic surface audio system that uses two stereo actuators to create the mid and high frequencies by shaking the panel, with bass drivers in the centre section creating the mid to lower tones. Overall the design is clean and minimalist, which looks contemporary, and the build quality is decent for the price point. The connections are located to the rear right of the panel looking from the rear and are familiar to anyone who has used a Sony TV in the last few years. We have both sideways and downwards facing connections within recessed areas of the back panel, and the power cable is hardwired to the rear left. Looking at the sideways connections first, we have a common interface slot followed by a 3.5mm audio jack, a 3.5mm audio out and an IR blaster input. Below these are two USB slots and HDMI 1. Moving to the downwards facing section, we have another USB input and three further HDMI slots. All the HDMI inputs are full bandwidth 18GB per second HDCP 2.3 compatible ports with 4K 60p, 444 capabilities and support for HLG, HDR10 and Dolby Vision HDR standards. We also have a LAN and optical digital input with two satellite and one terrestrial antenna. The remote control supplied with this OLED that costs £2,200 is a cheap plastic Sony model with small rubberized effect buttons. We've seen this remote on other TV models in the Sony range from 2018, and it's such a shame that Sony couldn't supply this 2019 OLED with the new remote that we saw with the XG95. The buttons are logically laid out and the remote itself is pretty intuitive to use. There are direct keys for Google Play and Netflix, and most use keys are in the centre with the directional and enter keys. Around these are the action menu, which opens up direct access to the picture and sound settings. The apps button opens up your most used apps list, and home opens up the Android Smart TV system. The TV button takes you to the U-View tuner, and the back key does exactly that. So the remote is certainly usable and it sits neatly in the hand, but it feels cheap, and given the cost of the TV and the design language used elsewhere, this just feels poor. The Sony AG8 features the X1 Extreme processor and all the same features as the AF8 it replaces. We really struggled to find any differences between the two models, with just some cosmetic changes to the stand and rear design of the TV. The X1 Extreme processor used in the AG8 is the model under the Master Series TVs, which use the X1 Ultimate. However, we found that when it comes to picture processing and motion, the AG8 with the Extreme chip has more options and slightly better performance than the Master Series Ultimate X1. This gives us more choices with Motion Flow XR settings, and the upscaling and other picture processing is also first class. We also get the now familiar HDR remaster, super bit mapping 4K HDR, triluminous display, live colour and dual database processing, and the AG8 also supports HLG, HDR10 and Dolby Vision high dynamic range signals. The AG8 also uses its own dynamic tone mapping and colour mapping for static metadata HDR content. There's also support for IMAX Enhanced content, although we're struggling to see what that actually does, and the AG8 also has the Netflix Calibrated mode. The Sony AG8 also features the acoustic surface audio system that uses the screen as a speaker, and there are two stereo actuators positioned 3/4 of the way up the rear panel, which vibrate the screen to create the higher frequency range, with drivers also positioned near the centre rear, which create the mid and low frequency tones. The effect of voices actually coming from the screen where the characters are positioned and not from below adds a real experience to the viewing. The AG8 also supports Dolby Digital Plus and DTS Digital Surround, along with simulated S4 Surround. If you want to add this soundbar, the AG8 also has the new stand design, which we explained earlier, that allows the panel to sit high enough for a soundbar to sit underneath the screen. The OS and Smart TV system is once again Android TV, and the AG8 ships with version 7 of the software, with no over-the-air version 8 audio update due at the time of this review in July 2019. Using version 7 was a chore, with one full-on crash and plenty of instances of hanging and extremely slow performance. Most of the time the system did work as intended, but every now and then it would throw a wobbly and freeze or slow to a crawl or crash. We did update the system using the USB method. You download the firmware to a USB drive and then insert this into the TV and run the update. This is fine for users who are confident with settings like this, which is most AV enthusiasts. However, we would imagine that this is above the level of complexity for most normal consumers who would not want to go to the hassle of doing this manually. So Sony really need to hurry up with the over-the-air update to audio. Once loaded, we noticed a slight improvement in speed and actions, but it's not all perfect, and we still encountered the odd slowdown of the system. The competition all do Smart TV better, faster and more stable than Sony. If you've ever seen a modern Sony TV, you will immediately recognise the menu system. We get to the menu via the Action menu button key on the remote control. The AG8 uses the X1 Extreme processor, and as such this has more options within the menus than the X1 Ultimate TVs. Picture mode wise, we have Vivid, Standard, Custom, Cinema Pro and Cinema Home, along with Sports, Animation, Photo Vivid, Photo Standard, Photo Custom, Game and Graphics. Obviously we don't need so many picture modes. One that gets close to the standards for HDR and SDR content is all we really need. Luckily the Cinema Pro for SDR and Cinema Home for HDR really works well for us here. Next up we move to the advanced settings, and within the advanced area we have sections for brightness, colour, clarity, motion, video options and reset. Within the brightness section we have brightness, which is a panel brightness setting. Then we have traditional contrast and gamma settings, along with what Sony call black level, which is named the brightness on other TV models. Under these we have black adjust, advanced contrast enhancer and peak luminance setting. The colour menu has the colour and hue settings, which should be left at default. Colour temperature at Expert 1 is the most accurate for grayscale, and advanced colour temperature is the calibration adjustment for 2-point and 10-point adjustments. Live colour we leave off, and sadly there is no CMS available on the AG8, with no colour gamut adjustment possible. Moving to clarity, and we have the sharpness and reality creation settings. We found leaving sharpness at default and switching off reality creation gave us the most accurate image. Random noise reduction and digital noise reduction are also left off, but if you do have to watch some poorly compressed SD sources, you may find the lowest settings work to improve things slightly. With high quality HD and 4K sources, you don't need to use them at all, but smooth gradation set to low does work well with most content to remove slight instances of colour gradation and banding. Motion houses the motion flow and film mode settings. Sony has been a brand that has some of the best motion on their TVs and displays. However, the last few Master Series TVs and the XG95 using the X1 Ultimate chip has removed some of the picture processing options, notably for cadence detection and interlaced sources such as TV tuners and set-top boxes. The AG8 uses the older X1 Extreme processor, and as such it keeps the more detailed motion choices that allows us to fine-tune motion so cadence detection and 24 frames per second material has the correct settings. Motion flow is easy to use and experiment with, and 24 frames per second material is displayed correctly with it switched off or in the true cinema mode. Clearness via the custom mode adds in black frame insertion, and given UK frame rates, that can get distracting and tiring quite quickly for most viewers. We personally found true cinema best for most material we viewed, but you are free to experiment with motion flow, and it can be very useful for fast moving sports content without adding in too many artifacts, as Sony is lighter on the soap opera effect compared to rivals. However, we did notice quite a few artifacts at the highest smoothness setting. Video option is next, and leaving all the three options on auto will take care of these settings for you, and that wraps up the picture menus. As always, we start by measuring the most accurate to the standards picture mode out of the box, and in this case that is the Cinema Pro mode. Remembering that the AG8 is a retail sample from a store, we were happy to see that the grayscale out of the box has really quite accurate results to the standards. There is a little bit too much blue in the brightest sections of the image, but overall the gamma tracks well to BT in 1886, and our delta E errors are also good, with just the brightest section of the image pushing this over the visible threshold of 3. Moving to the out-of-the-box colour gamut measurements to Rec 709, most of the saturation tracking points are close to where they should be, but the blue error in the grayscale also moves the colour points towards blue slightly. This creates some hue errors in green and magenta, but everything else remains accurate enough for an out-of-the-box result. We doubt viewers would notice these small errors without a reference image side by side. With the calibration controls available for the grayscale, we were able to get the reference results with a flat track for both the grayscale and gamma, meaning that delta E errors were all well under 1, making any error invisible to the eye. By fixing the grayscale, we also fixed the hue issues we had with the colour gamut. Although not everything is perfect with the colour saturation tracking, especially at 100%, but as hardly any content has any 100% saturation in it, that's not really a concern. The other issues are a slight oversaturation of red, which we cannot fix as there's no colour management system on the AG8. However, with actual viewing material, we didn't notice any obvious errors, and even with another OLED side by side, skin tones remained natural and we didn't see any overly red tones spoiling any content we actually watched. The first thing that we did notice with the AG8 was it had a dim looking HDR image like the AF8 model compared to most of its rivals. Using the peak versus window size automated measurement test, we can see that the peak brightness in the calibrated D65 HDR mode is 599 nits on a 5% window and 565 nits on a 10% window. Full frame brightness is as expected 142 nits. You can of course go for much brighter settings to achieve higher peaks, but you do so with excessive colour errors and clipping of peak details. Moving to the PQ EOTF results, we can see that the AG8 is set up to tone map and retain image APL consistency up to its peak brightness of around 560 nits. This retains blacks, shadows and mid-tone detail, while also trying to retain highlights without excessive clipping on 1000 and 4000 nit masters. Saturation tracking to the DCI P3 colour gamut, which all 4K HDR content is currently mastered to, is very good indeed, with almost complete coverage in saturation. Indeed, P3XY covers 96% and UV is 98%, which is very good indeed. BT 2020 coverage is 72% XY and 77% UV. Obviously, as this is an OLED TV, the contrast measurements in SDR and HDR are infinity. We should get this out of the way first of all, and that is the fact that the Sony AG8 offers exactly the same performance as the outgoing AF8, as it uses the same panel and electronics along with the Android operating system platform. As such, the performance is very good for an OLED TV, and to benchmark it we used a Philips OLED Plus 903, which uses the same panel and Android operating system, but with Philips picture processing as a comparison partner. Both TVs should offer very similar performance. With SDR HD images, the Sony has an excellent calibrated colour palette with realistic skin tones and natural hues coming across as a strong point. Blacks are, as expected, deep and fluid with excellent contrast and dynamics. Shadows are good and motion is superb. The Philips does get close to this performance when both are calibrated to the standards, with many of the same strong points. Subtle differences are seen in the red uniforms of the Orville, with the Sony looking more natural and saturated without going too far. But you really need to look hard for these subtle differences. Both sets are extremely accurate and similar in performance, and certainly for SDR content there's little to separate the sets, with the Sony just edging things slightly with colour reproduction, but it is very close indeed. Motion is a strong point for the Sony, and once again both SDR and HDR content and low frame rate 24 frames per second film material, it excelled in the motion performance, just edging the Philips in this regard with no interpolation switched on. Blacks and shadows are extremely impressive with a superb dynamic range, even with SDR content from streaming services. Compressed images didn't turn up any unwanted issues with upscaling and picture processing, making images look sharp but without any obvious edge enhancement or ringing to edges. Film grain was also present, as it should be, with no signs of posterization or colour banding at any point. Once again, the Sony excels with its natural and film-like colour performance, with skin tones being a highlight. And did Strickland ever have hair? Moving to HDR, and again the Sony is very good when it comes to colour reproduction, and with Dolby Vision content, the dynamic metadata approach works best with the AG8, with an incredibly dynamic and detailed image that doesn't lack overall brightness for the majority of Dolby Vision content that we tested. We also noticed less posterization issues in the blacks than with the AF8, and Dolby Vision dark mode was also decent and not overly dark as seen on last year's AF8. The Dolby Vision performance on the AG8 is a slight step up on last year. Moving to static metadata, HDR content did throw up a common issue with recent Sony OLEDs, and that's the fact that the main APL is consistent but also dimmer than competing sets. The Philips in side-by-side testing was slightly better in this respect and looked more colourful and dynamic between scene changes from dark to bright sections. The AF8 is more consistent, so there's no major jump in image brightness, and specular highlights are still there within the superb dynamic range, but overall the image is dimmer as a result. However, there's no getting away from the fact that OLED is still king when it comes to dynamic range and black levels with SDR and HDR content. It might not have the visual pop of a bright LED LCD TV, but instead it has pixel accurate dynamics that a fold backlight and local dimming will never match, and as such it has the edge with sheer image dynamics from black to white. That's not to say that it is perfect, far from it, and scenes with bright colours or whites covering most of the screen will trigger the automatic brightness limiter or ABL circuit, which dims the overall image, unlike an LED LCD TV, which can maintain full screen brightness with such images and added impact. The standout from the Sony in all of our testing was its blacks, dynamic range and cinematic colour palette, which just gave it the edge in side-by-side testing with the Philips. However, both are excellent sets. Oh, and IMAX Enhanced material was also tested on the AG8, and we're happy to tell you it looks identical to the same material being played on the non-IMAX Enhanced Philips. We noted no image differences whatsoever, and there is no IMAX picture mode on the Sony either. The IMAX Enhanced discs look superb on both OLED screens, as you would expect, and in DTS surround on the Sony. For those worried about burn-in with an OLED TV, the Sony is susceptible, like all OLEDs, to this happening if used with high brightness static images or titles such as news channel graphics over a long period of time. Likewise, hours of gaming in the brightest picture modes may also lead to some light image retention being seen. However, if treated to normal viewing of different sources and in more accurate picture modes, image retention shouldn't really be an issue, and we doubt you would ever see permanent damage with such use. As such, we're happy to recommend the Sony and other OLED TVs for normal movie and TV viewing, along with moderate gaming sessions. The AG8 is a great OLED TV with decent features, great image quality for SDR, and decent HDR performance with Dolby Vision and HDR10. However, it is also very much the same TV as the AF8, which is currently being run out of stock and sold off at least £500 to £700 cheaper. This is the only major issue when it comes to buying the AG8, and obviously if you can pick up the AF8, that's the one to buy. Most of the other issues we have with the TV are the same as we did have with the AF8. The Android TV system ships with version 7, which is open to crashing and freezing in use and is slow and cumbersome. At the time of this review in July 2019, there is no available over-the-air update to Android 8, also known as Oreo. To update, you must download the firmware and use the USB port on the TV to complete the process. This will be fine for those who are technically competent, but for the vast majority of users, it will be difficult or they won't know how to do it. Sony really need to hurry up with their over-the-air updates. However, even when updated, we still found the system underpowered and slow. It was great to see the XG95 LCD from Sony for 2019 given a newly designed remote control that fit with the price point of the TV and also offered something better than had gone before. Sadly, the 2019 AG8 OLED is left with last year's appalling cheap and nasty black plastic and rubberized button remote, which shouldn't be part of a £2,200 TV. And in terms of picture quality, the AG8 runs on the X1 Extreme processor, which means there's no advanced calibration controls or a colour management system, which is a shame. However, one plus point of that processor is the more in-depth motion settings, which actually makes the AG8 a very good TV for film and TV motion. Our only other concern about the AG8 is also the same as the AF8, and that is the dimness of the HDR image, even with Dolby Vision. The Sony is one of the dimmest OLED TVs on the market, and this is noticeable when compared to its peers side by side. The image is consistent and the APL is good for the vast majority of content, so only the brightest of highlights are clipped as a result, with blacks, shadows and midtones remaining strong and detailed. However, this consistency does end up with an HDR image that is detailed but slightly dark as a result. This is not an issue when watching in the dark, but daytime HDR viewing may be compromised, and that screen surface is also very reflective in a bright room. SDR content playback is superb, and the AG8 plays on the strengths of OLED with deep blacks, great shadows and mid-tone details, along with Sony's excellent colour reproduction that makes images look incredibly cinematic. There are no issues with images looking dim, as the SDR content isn't that bright to start with, and the per pixel switching makes everything look incredibly dynamic. The AG8 is one of the better OLED TVs for SDR accuracy. Overall, our feeling is the AG8 is certainly more of the same after the AF8 it replaces, and our advice would be to try and get hold of last year's model for cheaper if you can. If not, we do feel that there are better OLED offerings from LG, Panasonic and Philips when it comes to overall SDR and HDR performance, and the AG8 looks expensive when assessed against the rest of the market. It doesn't add anything new for 2019 other than a slight cosmetic and model number change, However, if you want a Sony OLED TV with a unique acoustic surface audio, great SDR performance, and are prepared to wait for over-the-air or manual update the OS system, the AG8 does offer enough to score the same as the previous AF8 model and a recommendation. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then please like and subscribe, and why not click the notification bell to find out when our next review is available.